Okay, we're up to Daf Lamed Hey Amid Aleph. Amr Rav Yonasan, Amr Rabbi. So in yesterday's Daf, towards the end, we quoted Ula Shita. Ula Shita is, we know that we had yesterday that if a person eats something that's tameh, Chazal made it that you're tameh. We had a machlokes, if you eat a rishon, do you become a sheni, do you become a rishon? Machlokes of Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. Ula said that if you eat a shlishi of chulin, shenasu ataras hatruma, meaning you have chulin, which normally cannot become a shlishi, but you're makbid on it that it should have the severity of truma. So we said if you're makbid that it should have severity of truma, it could become a shlishi. If you were to then eat that, the halacha was, said Ula, that you become a shlishi. And therefore, you're not allowed to eat truma, because a shlishi cannot consume truma, but you can touch truma because truma cannot become a revi. So by you touching truma, it would make it a revi, and that's not a thing. So basically, chulin shenasu ataras truma. If you eat a shlishi of chulin shenasu ataras truma, you become a shlishi. That was ula shita. So says the Gemara, came out the exact same thing, but instead of chulin shenasu ataras truma, that's a shlishi. Meaning, instead of a shlishi consuming a shlishi of chulin that was with the severity of truma, says Rav Yonasan in the name of Rabbi, if you eat a shlishi of truma, not of chulin shenasu ataras truma itself, that's a shlishi, you also become a shlishi. The exact same halacha, but instead of chulin anasu ataras truma itself. Rav Yonasan Amar Rabbi, ha'oichel shlishi, if you eat shlishi of truma, atzma asalechel mutaliga, you become a shlishi. It's the exact same halacha, but instead of chulin shenasu ataras truma itself. Now the Gemara speaks it out. Why was this necessary to say? Why do you need both shitas? So the Gemara says basically you need both. I'll say it out, so I'll say it inside. The reason why you need both is because if you just had ula shita, I would say, yeah, if you eat chulin shenasu ataras truma, you become a shlishi because it's just chulin. But if you eat truma itself, that's a shlishi. Tamei truma, maybe you become a sheni, or maybe you become a risha. I don't know. So therefore the Gemara says, itzrich the ula, itzrich the Rav Yonasan. Even the ula, if you just had ula, which has the exact same halacha, but it's chulin shenasu ataras truma. I would say hani mili b'chulin shenasu ataras truma. Only chulin shenasu ataras truma do you become a shlishi, but not a sheni or whatever. So you're a shlishi, so you could consume truma, but you're not allowed to consume truma, but you're allowed to touch truma because that would make it a revi, and that's not a thing. Aval truma b'negia nami aser. But maybe if you actually consumed a shlishi of truma itself, maybe then you become a sheni. Maybe Chazal are super strict, meaning maybe truma that's tameh is more severe than chulin shenasu ataras truma that's tameh. It's Tich Rav Yonasan. V'imid Rav Yonasan hava amina hani mili truma ava chulin be'achilanami shari tzrichi. And the opposite is also true. If you just had Rebbe shita, which is truma atzma, you become a shlishi. I would say maybe chulin shenasu ataras truma of a shlishi that you consume. Maybe you become a revi. Maybe you become nothing. Therefore, you need both to tell you that there's no distinction in halacha between consuming a shlishi of truma and a shlishi of chulin shenasu ataras truma. In both cases, you become a shlishi. Now, the Gemara says, we're going back to our discussion yesterday, which was whether shlishi of chulin shenasu ataras hakodesh. Yasser v'yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta k'mei Rav Nachman. V'yasser v'kamar ha'oichel shlishi shel chulin shenasu ataras hakodesh. If you have chulin, which normally cannot become a shlishi, but it's shenasu ataras hakodesh, which is your makbid that all your chulin should have the severity of kachim, and this chulin is a shlishi. So the halacha is tahar le'echel b'kodesh. You do not become a revi, meaning, I would argue that if this is a shlishi, right, the only thing that exists in the world of revi is kachim. Kachim, you could have if you're a revi, you can't consume kachim. Kachim is the only thing that a revi actually exists by. So I'm consuming a shlishi. I have chulin shenasu ataras hakodesh. I have makbid on my chulin that it should have the severity of kedusha, and it became a shlishi. It became tummy with a level of shlishi. So I eat it. So I would argue that I should become a revi. Right, shlishi would make me a revi. Right? I consumed it. I should become at least the least. I should become a revi. If I'm a revi, that means I cannot consume kachim because kachim cannot come in contact with a revi. So I would argue that. Says Rav Nachman, no. Ha'oichel shlishi shel chulin shenasu ataras hakodesh. If you consume chulin shenasu ataras hakodesh, that's a shlishi. Tahar lechel b'kodesh. You don't become revi. Why? I thought there's a revi. So it says Rabbi Nachman, she'ein lach davar shayis revi b'kodesh ela kodesh mekudesh bilvad. The only time you'll become a revi is if you consume kachim that's a shlishi, not chulin shenasu ataras hakodesh. Meaning, The way Rashi explains it, the whole concept of a revi'i by kachim, at least according to this sugya, is a derabanan, and Chazal only created it when you consume kachim that's a shlishi, not chulin shanas or ataras hakodesh. So if you have chulin shanas or ataras hakodesh, that's a shlishi, and you consume it, you don't become a revi'i. If it was actual kachim that was a shlishi, you would. If it was actual carbon, whatever, then you would. But chulin shanas or ataras hakodesh, according to Rabbi Nachman, you don't become a revi'i. Okay. So that's Rabbi Nachman Shita. So the Gemara has a kasha. The Gemara says, Masiv Rabbi Bar Chama. I have a question. The question is as follows. Again, according to Rabbi Nachman, if you eat chulin shanas v'ataras hakodesh, it's a shlishi, you don't become revi. Here's the question. There's a Mishnah. The Mishnah says shlishi. If you consume a shlishi, now we'll see what type of shlishi. Sheni la kodesh, you become a sheni. So not only if you consume a shlishi, are you like, you don't become a revi, you become a sheni. You go up in madrega. You become much more severe. Bein sheni l'truma, but you're a sheni only regarding kachim, meaning vis-a-vis kachim, you're a sheni. So if you touch something that's carbon, you touch another thing, that would also be a revi'i by kachim. But you're not a sheni for truma. So if I consume a shlishi, I become a sheni. Now Rabbi Nachman said, if I consume a shlishi of chulin shanas v'ataras hakodesh, I'm nothing. This Mishnah says if I consume a shlishi, we'll see a shlishi of what? I become a sheni for kachim. Now which shlishi? B'chulin shanas v'ataras truma. Not al taras hakodesh, but al taras truma. So if I have chulin that I'm treating with the severity of truma, and it becomes a shlishi, I become a sheni. Wait a minute, I don't understand. Am I alav kodesh b'kodeshu? I don't understand. Rabbi Nachman just got finished saying that chulin shenaso ataras kodesh, that's a shlishi, I consume, I become nothing. But over here, shlishi of a chulin shenaso ataras truma, which is not the same, I get it, but it's pretty close. I become a sheni. So chulin shenaso ataras kodesh is nothing, but this I become a sheni. What's going on? So Gemara says, I'll tell you why. Really, a chulin shenaso ataras kodesh is nothing. If you eat a shlishi, you don't become a revi. Nothing. Why, if I eat a shlishi of chulin shenasa ataras truma, do I go up in madrega? I'll tell you why. Amar lei hanach l'truma shetarasei tumasi heitz ala kodesh. The difference is that by truma, what's the case? I'm makbid on this food that it should have the severity of truma. That's the severity of truma, and it becomes a shlishi. I consume it, I become a sheni. Why would I become a sheni? I don't understand. I thought, first of all, if it was chulin shenas v'ataras hakodesh, I become nothing. But not only am I not nothing, I'm going up in my drink. I'm becoming more tameh. Why is that? So the Gemara explains. I'll tell you why. This is food. This is apples that I'm makbid should have the severity of truma, and then they became a shlishi. Because the severity of truma, the vigilance for truma is not as high as kachim. Something that's a shlishi for truma, we treat as like a sheni for kachim. I'll tell you why. Because the let's say the security level, let's say a 10 is the most. Kachim is a 10. It requires the highest level of security from Tumatara. Truma is, let's say, a 7. It's not as high. It's high, but it's not as high. If you have something that's a shlishi from Truma, we're going to treat it as a sheni for kachim. Why is that? Because the vigilance level of Truma is lower, and still it became a shlishi. Something that became a shlishi, something that became tameh, when you were makbid on the level of truma, then we have to assume, I don't know what you were worried about, meaning I don't know how careful you were when it comes to kachim. Therefore, Rabbi Nachman could be correct that if you have shlishi of chulin shenas v'ataras hakodesh that you consume, you don't become a revi. But if it's chulin shenas v'ataras truma, that's a shlishi, you become a sheni. Why? We're going to be super strict. Because the vigilance level for truma is not as high as kachim. And if it became tameh as truma, I don't know what it became. Maybe it became a sheni for kachim, because you were clearly not careful. You couldn't handle the security level of truma. You definitely were not makbid enough for kachim, and therefore, from a kachim's perspective, if it became a shlishi when you were makbid on truma, maybe it became a sheni when it comes to vis-a-vis kachim. So therefore, the fact that it's something that's vigilant for truma is like, if it's tahor for truma, it's tameh for kachim, basically, in a nutshell. So therefore, Rabbi Nachman could be right that chulin shenas v'ataras hakodesh, a shlishi does not make a revi, but a shlishi of chulin shenas v'ataras truma becomes a sheni for kachim, because vigilance for truma is basically almost nothing compared to vigilance for kachim. Uminat timra, how do I know that vigilance for A, like tahor for A, could be tameh for B, which requires a higher clearance? D'tanan. Basically, this apple that I'm makbid on truma, just because it's tahor for truma, it's going to be tameh for kachim. So it's a shlishi for truma. It's not tahor, but it's like a shlishi. I'm going to treat that as a sheni for kachim because it's a higher security clearance. How do I know this? It's not because it's a Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Big Day Amaretz. The clothing of Amaretz, Chazal treated that the clothing of Amaretz is tameh because they're not makbid on people sitting on them. Right? If a nida sits on them, it becomes tameh. Big Day Amaretz, Midras Leprushim. Big Day Amaretz, the clothing of Amaretz, even if they're not aware of any tuma, is considered tameh for a parush. Someone who's makbid, it's tameh automatically. And Big Day Oichle Truma, Midras Lekaidish. And if you have someone who's only makbid on truma, but not makbid on kachim, his clothing are tameh for someone who's makbid on kachim. Meaning, if I'm only being careful for truma but not for kachim, my clothing are tameh for someone who wants to eat kachim because the security clearance for truma is not as high. So if you have a guy who doesn't eat kachim but he's makbid on truma, his clothing, even when tahar, will be tameh compared to someone who wants to eat kachim because the security clearance is not as high. So that's the source for our discussion as well. Clothing to fruit, basically. You see by clothing that tahar for truma is tameh for kachim, so by fruit, tahar for truma is going to be tameh for kachim. Shlishi for Chullin, for truma will be a sheni for kachim. Amar Rava disagrees. Midrasas kamret. How do you compare clothing to food? Shani Midrasas, go to the next page. Clothing is very different. I'll tell you why. Shemateshel ve'shanida. It's statistically more of a problem. What's the source? So you have by clothing that tahar for truma is tameh for kachim, so we want to apply it to food. It's not fair. By clothing, it's very, very realistic that clothing will become tameh. All it takes is a woman who's a needed to sit on them. She sits on the bed, and the clothing are not tameh that she was sitting on, or the sheets are not tameh. Very, very, very reasonable. Very, 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 very common. Therefore, Chazal were super strict that although it's tahar for truma, it's going to be tameh for kachim. But when it comes to fruit, it's I don't know. The likelihood of it becoming tameh is the same. I don't see. It's not like a high probability. So says the Gemara, Shemeteshel v'shanida, ava peper le'amrinan. And Rav Yitzchak, who feels that is a good source, peper nami amri, he says, no, I don't see the difference between fruit and clothing. Okay. Ma'asiv Rav Yitzchak. Okay, a few more minutes of the kachim, and then we'll end the sugya. Ma'asiv Rav Yitzchak medifti, omri amrinan bepeira. Do we say this halacha regarding peira? Meaning that by peiris, tahar for one is tameh for the other. V'atznam, there's a Mishnah, and the Mishnah is saying like this. Just a quick thing you have to remember: Amiratzim are not trusted for being vigilant when it comes to truma, and they're not makbid on tuma tahara. Therefore, if an Amaretz wants to give truma to a kayin, we don't trust him that it's tahar. We treat it as tameh truma. Now, there is one time that they were vigilant when it comes to wine. This is talking about wine. The one time that they were vigilant was during the bottling season. During the wine pressing and the olive pressing season, they would all go to the mikvah. So if you have a bottle, so basically if you give a kayin truma, if an Amaretz gives a kayin truma during the bottling season, then he could drink it, because during the bottling season they always went to the mikvah. But if it was given after the bottling season, months later, no good. Now, that's halacha number one. They're only makbid, trusted for Tumah Tahara during the bottling season. Second halacha, Chazal allowed all Amaratzim to be able to donate wine to the Beis Hamikdash, even though normally we're not makbid, we don't trust them, but for the karban, the nitzach hayayin, we do trust them. Why? Because if you don't accept wine from them, they're going to feel rejected, they're going to go do avodah zarah, do crazy stuff, build their own bamas. So throughout the year, we accept their wine for karbanos. For truma, we only accept it during the bottling season. So says the Mishnah, Hatnan, im amar hefrashi l'toch revi'is kodesh. Amaretz gives a bottle of wine not during the bottling season. No good for truma, not during the bottling season. But he says a quarter of this wine, he gives to the kayin, a bottle of wine. He says, this is my truma. It's no good. But he says a quarter of that wine, I'm donating as a wine libation for the Beis Hamikdash. That part is accepted throughout the year. So what's the halacha? Neman. Because we believe that he's tahar meaning we accept his wine regarding the karban, we accept the entire bottle. But why? I don't understand. If you're telling me tahar for truma is tameh for kachim, and they're not treated as the same, so the truma wine, which we're saying is not the vigilant level for kachim, should contaminate the kachim. So why is that we accept the entire bottle? So Amarle, he responded, Tuma b'chiburin karmet, you can't compare the two. When they're in one bottle, then the fact, Tuma b'chiburin shani, because we accept and we believe that he is tahar vis-a-vis the parts of the bottle of wine for kachim, we're going to accept the entire bottle. Meaning you're looking at it as sort of trying to separate the two and say, well, we trust him for A, we don't trust him for B, so B should contaminate A. But when they're in one bottle, if the Chazal allowed you to accept the part of bottle A, then by definition they allowed you to accept the entire bottle in this circumstance as well. You have to know the lumdus exactly, but that's okay. One last part of the sugya. Again, Rav Yitzchak said before that. Yeah, Rav Yitzchak said that if a person eats a shlishi of chulin shanasu ataras hakodesh, he does not become a Revi. I think that's how we got into. That's how we started today's daf. Yeah. So not so we started, but that's so we just said Rav Yitzchak said that before. So the Gemara says, yeah, this is Rav Yitzchak Marshul Bar Marta Kamei Rav Nachman Ha'Ichel Shlishi Shel Chulin Shanasu Taras HaKodesh Tar Lechel BeKodesh, that a Shlishi Shanasu Truma of Chulin Shanasu Taras HaKodesh does not make a Revi. Maser Rav Huna Bar Nasan, there's a mafurish a brisa not like that. Again, according to Rav Yitzchak, quoting Rabbi Nachman, if a person eats chulin shanasu ataras hakodesh, a shlishi of chulin shanasu ataras hakodesh, he does not become a revi. Only actual kachim of a shlishi makes a revi. Chulin shanasu ataras hakodesh is not. The problem is a brisa says mafurish not like that. What does the brisa say? Hasheni shebachulin. If you have a sheni, mitam mashkin chulin, it makes a revi. Poisel oichel truma, right? Because it makes a sheni makes a shlishi, which means it will invalidate truma. The shlishi and a shlishi, as we'll see in a moment, of chulin shanasu ataras hakodesh. It makes a revi. If I eat it, then I become a revi. Mefurish, not like Rav Yitzchak. Mefurish. This brisa clearly states that if a person consumes of a shlishi of chulin shanasu ataras hakodesh, you become a revi. Clear as day. So the Gemara says, you're right, it's Tanoihi. It's a machlokes Tanoim de Tanya, as the brisa says, chulin shanasu ataras hakodesh, harei hinke chulin. Chulin shanasu ataras hakodesh are like chulin; they do not make a revi, meaning, I'm sorry, according to this opinion, they don't even make a shlishi. This Tanakama is a completely new shita, which is, again, we're trying to prove, so far we have two shitas about chulin shanasu ataras hakodesh. You have Rabbi Yitzchak, who says it does not make a revi, a shlishi does not make a revi. You had the brisa we just quoted that said that a shlishi does make a revi. Now this brisa, the first opinion says chulin shanasu ataras hakodesh doesn't even make a shlishi. And then Rav Elazar Bar Tzadik harein ketruma l'tam mishnayim lives l'echad. Rav Elazar Bar Tzadik says no, it makes a shlishi but not a revi, and that's how Rav Yitzchak follows this opinion that it makes a shlishi and not a revi. Okay, new topic. We're done to matara. All right. The Mishnah had said that what makes food susceptible to tuma? So we said blood. So if you shecht an animal and no blood comes out, it's not susceptible to tuma. Comes Rav Shimon, hochshur l'shchita. He says no, the shchita itself, even if no blood flow, it makes it susceptible to tuma because the shchita makes it roy lachila, makes it food regarding the heter achila. It also makes it food regarding susceptibility to tuma. Amr Rav Asi, I'm a Rav Shimon. Shchitasei machsheres v'loy b'dam. So the Gemara is machadish that according to Rav Shimon, it's not the way I read the Mishnah was according to Rav Shimon, you don't need blood to be susceptible to tumah. Blood definitely would. When you shech the animal, the blood comes out. It definitely makes it susceptible to tumah. But even without that, it's a shchita. According to this Gemara, no, it's the shchita and not the blood. Shchita and not the blood. Blood of a shchita does not do it. It's dafka the shchita. You'll say, pause. Let me explain 2 points. First of all, what's the difference? It's either the blood or the shchita. Either one. I'll tell you the nafkamina. If blood spurts out of an animal that you shechted onto another thing, Rav Shimon believes it's not susceptible to tumah. It's not the blood of the shchita. It's definitely the shchita itself, but the blood of the shchita does not. Now, what this has to do is, let me just clarify. Blood making food susceptible to tumah does not apply to all blood. As we'll see, based on Xeris HaKosev, it has to be where the Torah describes the blood like a liquid, like a drink. And therefore, Rav Shimon Shita, as we'll see, according to Rav Asi, is that the blood of the shchita does not do it. A couple of things do not do it. I'll tell you what does not do it. Blood of a shchita, according to Rav Asi, if an animal dies naturally and just blood flows from the body, because that sometimes happens, does not do it. If an animal gets injured, as we'll see, does not do it. The only thing that, according to Rav Asi, in the view of Rav Shimon, because the pasuk does say that blood makes food susceptible to tumah. According to Ravasi, the only type of blood that makes it susceptible to tumah is if you kill an animal not through shchita. You shoot it in the head, or you shoot in the neck, whatever it is. But shchita does not do it, as we'll see. According to Ravasi, dam shchita does not make food susceptible to tumah. I have a proof. Rav Shimon Aimer hoshu b'shchita. Well, I'll prove it to you. The Mishnah says that the shchita does it, implying the dam shchita does not. My lav shchita v'lo dam. Gemara says loy af shchita. No. You could read it. You could say that it's the dam shchita, and all Rav Shimon means is dam shchita definitely does, but also shchita without dam also does. So unclear. Tashim out to bring a raya. Amar len Rav Shimon. So this Brisa clearly states, you think the blood is doing it? It's the shchita that does it. So clearly he says the blood does not do it. He says, you think the blood does it? No, it's the shchita. So it's a raya. So the Gemara says, no. You could argue that what he meant was, you think blood alone does it? Meaning, you could add the word alone. So if it's the first way to read it is, you think blood is machsher? It's the shchita. That would imply blood does not. But if you add the word alone, you think the blood alone does it? Of course blood does it. You know what also does it? The shchita. So it's unclear. Tashima, another proof. Dam hameis eno machshir. The Brisa says that if an animal dies naturally, the blood that oozes from the body does not cause food to be susceptible to tumah. That's a clear halacha. The question is, what can I deduce from that? My lab hadam shchita machshir. The implication is dafka, the blood of an animal that dies naturally, it's not susceptible to tumah. But the blood of the shchita is. So you see the blood of shchita is, because again, the Brisa says something is not, which implies something is. Dam of a blood of an animal that dies naturally is not. The implication is dam shchita is. The Gemara says, "Lo, dam halal machshir." No. The blood of an animal that you killed. I told you. If you shoot an animal in the head, it definitely is. It's machshir, as we'll see in a moment. So the Brisa says, if an animal dies naturally, it's not. I don't deduce dam shchita, dam halal. Not if the animal dies through shchita. If it dies through shchita, taka, there's no hechsher. It's dafka if it dies through being killed by a person, not through shchita. Aval dam shchita, but what's that dam shchita? Loy machshir. Oh, so the Gemara says that that's the case. L'shin dam shchita v'chol shin dam ames. Then why does the Brisa pick the case to tell you of non-hachshara? Of an animal died naturally, tell me a bigger chiddush, tell me dam shchita. If dam shchita does not cause the food to be susceptible to tumah, why not say that? Why does it pick an example of an animal dying naturally? It should pick that. So the Gemara says, "Dam hameis itzurchale." I'll tell you why. It picked an animal dying naturally because it's a bigger chiddush. So, you might think mali katla ihu, mali katla malachamaves. Right? If you shoot it in the head, it causes it to be susceptible to tumah. So I might think, what's the difference between me taking the animal's life and the malachamaves taking the animal's life? It dies naturally. It should be the same. Kamash malon, no, dying naturally is not. So the reason why I picked dying naturally and not dam shchita is because I wanted to point out that point that dying naturally. Even though you'll say, what's the difference? A dead animal's dead animal. No. There's a difference between you killing the animal and the animal dying naturally. Tashima, another proof for Shimon Omer, dam agafasai, a blood of an animal's wound. The animal's not dead, but it cuts itself. That does not cause susceptible to tumah. The implication being, ha dam shchita machshir, that the dam shchita is. So Gemara says, loy, ha dam chalala machshir. No. Not the dam shchita is not. What you could deduce from that is dam chalalim, which is that if you kill the animal, you shoot it in the neck, that's when it's machshir. Says the Gemara, very similar back and forth. Aval dam shchita mai loy machshir. Lishmin dam shchita v'kol shein dam gafasai. Well, if dam shchita is not, then why does the Brisa not say that case? Why does the Brisa pick an example of an animal's cut, an animal's wound? Why not say dam shchita? So the Gemara says, dam gafasai itzurchale. The reason why I picked the case of the wound is because that's a bigger chiddush. You might think mali katla kula mali katla palga. If you shoot the animal in the neck and it dies, the blood is susceptible to tumah, cause things to be susceptible to. So you might think to say, what's the difference between an animal dying fully, which causes food to be susceptible to tumah, and an animal partially dying, i.e. a wound? Kamash malan, a dam of a wound does not make anything susceptible to tumah. Now let's just finish up. So now we're saying that dam shchita does not, but what definitely does is if you kill the animal, you shoot in the neck. Why is it that the blood of an animal that you kill, not through shchita, causes susceptible to tumah? The chsiv v'dam chalalim yishtek, because the pasuk says the blood of the slain animal it drinks. So it has the lashon of dam chalalim, that case of blood being spilled because something was killed, and it says yishtek, drinking, implying that it's a liquid, that the shtia, so it causes things to be hechsher tumah, because it has a lashon of drinking, like a beverage. and beverages cause things to be susceptible to tumah. Here's the problem. Dam shchita also has that lashon. Ala aretz tishbachenu kamayim. It said it should spill on the ground like water. Comparing it to water, water makes things susceptible to tumah, so why don't I use this as a source? So the Gemara went with this. The Gemara says no. Dam aretz tishbachenu kamayim is not to tell me that it causes it to be susceptible to tumah. So why is it called mayim? That pasuk is used for something else. It's not extra to teach me that that if you shecht an animal, the blood is like water to be susceptible to tumah. But rather, if I shecht a carbon that's puzzle, a carbon becomes disqualified, I'm allowed to use the blood for personal use. And it's not me'ilah. You might think, even a disqualified carbon, let's say a carbon becomes disqualified, you still can't use it for everything. You're allowed to eat it, but you're not allowed to shear it in public, and you're not allowed to have it do personal work because it still has some kedusha. So you might think that because it has some kedusha, daman liboy kvura, its blood should be forbidden to use and should require burial. Kamash malan al aretz tishbechanu kamayim, that it has a heter hana like water, but it's not extra to teach me that it makes things susceptible to tumah. Okay, we'll stop here.